But why? But why? Why did he come to Copenhagen?
My dear Heisenberg, my dear boy, come in, come in.
Explain it to me. You could have even explained it to each other.
That is most interesting.
If something works, it works.
Now we're all three of us dead and gone.
Like ghosts.
You're still thinking about it? You're still thinking about it? You're still thinking about it? You're still thinking about it?
But why?
You're still thinking about it?
Why did he come to Copenhagen?
Does it matter, my love, now that we're all three of us dead and gone?
Some questions remain long after their owners have died, lingering like ghosts, looking for the answers they never found in life.
Some questions have no answers to find.
Why did he come? What was he trying to tell you?
He explained it later.
He explained over and over again. Each time he explained, it became more obscure.
Well, it was probably very simple when you come right down to it. He wanted to have a talk.
A talk to the enemy in the middle of a war.
Not Greta, my love. We were scarcely the enemy.
It was 1941.
Heisenberg was one of our oldest friends.
Heisenberg was German. We were Danes. We were under German occupation.
It put us in a difficult position, certainly.
I've never seen you as angry with anyone as you were with Heisenberg that night.
Not to disagree, but I believe I remained remarkably calm.
I know when you're angry.
It was as difficult for him as it was for us.
So why did he do it? Now no one can be hurt. Now no one can be betrayed.
I doubt if he ever really knew himself.
And he wasn't a friend. Not after that visit. That was the end of the famous friendship between Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg.
Now we're all dead and gone. Yes. There are only two things the world remembers about me. One is the uncertainty principle. The other is my mysterious visit to Niels Bohr in Copenhagen in 1941. Everyone understands uncertainty, or thinks he does. No one understands my trip to Copenhagen. Time and time again I've explained it. To Bohr himself and Margrethe. To interrogators and intelligence officers. To journalists and historians. The more I've explained, the deeper the uncertainty has become. Well, I shall be happy to make one more attempt. Now we're all dead and gone. Now no one can be hurt. Now no one can be betrayed.
I never entirely liked him, you know. Perhaps I can say that to you now.
Yes, you did. When he was first here in the 20s, of course you did. On the beach at Tisvilde with us and the boys, he was one of the family.
Something alien about him, even then.
So quick and eager.
Too quick, too eager.
Those bright, watchful eyes.
Too bright, too watchful.
Well, he was a very great physicist. I've never changed my mind about that.
They were all good. All the people who came to Copenhagen to work with you. You had most of the great pioneers of atomic theory here at one time or another.
But the more I look back on it, the more I think Heisenberg was the greatest of them all.
So what was Bohr? He was the first of us all, the father of us all. Modern atomic physics began when Bohr realized that quantum theory applied to matter as well as to energy. 1913. Everything we did was based on that great insight of his.
And the day he first came to work with me here in Copenhagen in 1924.
I'd only just finished my doctorate, and Bohr was the most famous atomic physicist in the world.
And a little over a year, he had invented quantum mechanics.
It came out of his work with you.
Mostly what he'd done with Max Born and Pascual Jordan and Göttingen. Another year or so, and he'd got uncertainty.
And you'd done complementarity.
We argued them both out together.
We did most of our best work together.
Heisenberg usually led the way.
Bohr made sense of it all.
We operated like a business.
Chairman and managing director.
Father and son.
A family business.
Even though we had sons of our own.
And we went on working together long after he ceased to be my assistant.
Long after I left Copenhagen in 1927 and gone back to Germany. Long after I had a chair and a family of my own.
Then the Nazis came to power.
And it became more and more difficult. The war broke out impossible. Until that day in 1941.
When it finished forever.
Yes. Why did he do it?
September 1941. For years, I had it down in my memory as October.
September, the middle of September.
Curious sort of diary memory is.
You open the pages and all the neat headings and tidy jottings dissolve around you.
Step through the pages into the days and months themselves.
Past becomes the present inside your head.
September 1941, Copenhagen. And at once, here I am, getting off the train from Berlin, a plain civilian suit among all the field gray of the Wehrmacht, the naval gold braid, the well-tailored black of the SS. Back in the city I know so well, with a stark north wind off the sound, and the sky clearing after a day of rain. Suddenly, the old familiar bells of City Hall ring out, and for a moment, everything is as it always was. I'm a young man again, just setting out on my life. Only, of course, I'm not. I'm the middle-aged visiting professor with the text of a learned lecture in my bag. And hidden inside my head, another communication that has to be delivered. The lecture is on astrophysics. Text inside my head is a more difficult one.
We can't go to the lecture, obviously.
Not if he's giving it at the German Cultural Institute. It's a Nazi propaganda organization.
He must know what we feel about that.
My colleague, Karl von Weizsäcker, has written to warn Bohr of my arrival.
He won't be the Heisenberg you used to know.
He'll be a little older, certainly.
I still think of him as a boy.
He's nearly 40. A middle-aged professor, fast catching up to the rest of us.
And you've invited him to the house?
Weizsäcker said he wants to see me privately. My love, we can't keep him out of the house.
Niels, they've occupied our country.
He is not they.
He is one of them.
He's a friend.
He's a German.
A white Jew. That's what they called him. He taught relativity, and the Nazis said that was Jewish physics. He couldn't mention Einstein by name, but he stuck with relativity, in spite of the most terrible attacks.
All the real Jews have lost their jobs. He's still teaching.
He's still teaching relativity.
Still a professor at Leipzig.
At Leipzig, yes, not at Munich. They kept him out of the chair at Munich.
He could have been at Columbia.
Or Chicago. He had offers from both.
He wouldn't leave Germany.
He wants to be there to rebuild German science when Hitler's gone. He told Haussmann.
I wonder if they suspect for one moment how painful it was to get permission for this trip. The humiliating appeals to the party, the demeaning efforts to have strings pulled by our friends in the Foreign Office.
The Gestapo planted microphones in his house. He told Haussmann when he was in America. The SS brought him in for interrogation at the basement at the Prince Albrechtstrasse.
And then they let him go again.
He knows he's still being watched, obviously.
So it will all be reported upon. Who he sees, what he says to them, what they say to him.
I carry my surveillance around like an infectious disease.
And you won't talk about politics?
We'll stick to physics. I'm assuming that's physics that he wants to talk to me about.
I think you must also assume that you and I are not the only people who hear what's said in this house.
I happen to know that Bohr is also under surveillance. Does he realize?
If you want to speak privately, you'd better go out in the open air.
I shan't want to speak privately.
You could go for another of your walks together.
Shall I be able to suggest a walk?
I don't think we shall be going for any walks. Whatever he wants to say, he can say where everyone can hear it. I have nothing to hide.
The Gestapo are not the only people watching you. There's also our fellow Danes. It would be a terrible betrayal of all their trust in you if they thought you were collaborating.
Inviting an old friend to dinner is hardly collaborating.
It might appear to be collaborating.
Yes, he's put us in a difficult position.
I shall never forgive him.
This is going to be a deeply awkward occasion.
He must have reason. He must have a very good reason.
Some new idea he wants to try out on you, perhaps.
What can it be, though? Where are we off to next?
So now your curiosity's aroused, in spite of everything.
So now here I am, walking out in the autumn twilight to the Bohr's house, followed presumably by my invisible shadow. What am I feeling? Fear, certainly. The touch of fear one always feels for a teacher, for an employer, for a parent. Much worse fear about what I have to say, about how to express it, how to broach it in the first place. Worse fear still about what happens if I fail.
It's not something to do with the war.
Heisenberg is a theoretical physicist. I don't think anyone has yet discovered a way to use theoretical physics to kill people.
It couldn't be something about fission,
Fission? Why would he want to talk to me about fission?
because you're working on it,
Heisenberg isn't.
isn't he? Everybody else in the world seems to be, and you're the acknowledged authority.
He hasn't published on fission.
It was Heisenberg who did all the original work on the physics of the nucleus, and he consulted you then. He consulted you at every step.
That was back in 1932. Fission's only been around for the last 3 years.
But if the Germans were developing some type of weapon based on nuclear fission,
My love, no one is developing a weapon based on nuclear fission.
but if the Germans were trying to, Heisenberg would be involved.
There is no shortage of good German physicists.
There's no shortage of good German physicists in America or Britain.
The Jews have gone, obviously.
Einstein, Wolfgang Pauli, Max Born, Otto Frisch, Lisa Meitner. We led the world in theoretical physics. Once.
So Heisenberg would be in charge of the work?
Greta, there is no work. Wheeler and I did it all back in 1939, and one of the implications of our paper was there was no way in the foreseeable future in which fission can be used to produce any kind of weapon.
Then why is everybody still working on it?
Because there's an element of magic in it. You fire a neutron at the nucleus of a uranium atom, it splits into 2 other elements. It's what the alchemists were trying to do, turn one element into another.
So why is he coming?
Now your curiosity is aroused.
My forebodings.
I crunch over the familiar gravel to the boar's front door and tug at the familiar belt pull. Fear, yes, and another sensation that's become painfully familiar over the past year. A mixture of self-importance and sheer helpless absurdity. That of all the 2,000 million people in the world, I'm the one who's been charged with this impossible responsibility. The heavy door swings open.
My dear Heisenberg.
My dear Born.
Come in, come in!
And of course, as soon as they catch sight of each other, all their caution disappears. The old ashes leap up from the flames. If we can just get through all these treacherous little opening spillities.
I'm so touched you felt able to ask me.
We must try to go on behaving like human beings.
I realize how awkward it is. And Margareta, I haven't seen...
Since you were here 4 years ago.
You've changed a lot.
Well, I was hoping to see you both in 1938 at the Congress in Warsaw.
I believe you had some personal trouble.
A little business in Berlin.
In the Prince Albrechtstrasse.
A slight misunderstanding.
As we heard. I'm so sorry.
These things happen. The question is now resolved. Happily resolved. We should all have met in Zurich.
In September 1939.
Only, of course.
There was the unfortunate clash with the outbreak of war.
Sadly.
Sadly for us, certainly.
A lot more sadly still for many people.
Yes, indeed.
Well, there it is.
What can I say?
What can any of us say in the present circumstances?
No. Well, and your sons?
Are well, thank you. Elizabeth, the children?
Very well. They send their love, of course.
They so much wanted to see each other, in spite of everything. But now the moment has come, they're so busy avoiding each other's eyes, they can scarcely see each other at all.
I hope you know how much it means to me to be back here in Copenhagen, in this house. I've become rather isolated in these last few years.
I can imagine.
Me, he scarcely notices. I watch him discreetly from behind my expression of polite interest as he struggles on.
Have things here been difficult?
Difficult?
Of course, he has to ask. He has to get it out of the way.
Difficult. What can I say? Well, we haven't been treated to the gross abuses that have occurred elsewhere. The race laws have not been enforced.
Yet.
Several months ago, they began deporting communists and other anti-German elements.
But you personally?
Have been left strictly alone.
I've been anxious about you.
It's kind of you. No call for sleepless nights in Leipzig so far, though.
Another silence. He's done his duty. Now he can begin to steer the conversation around to pleasanter subjects.
Are you still sailing?
Sailing?
Not a good start.
No, no sailing.
The sound is,
Mind.
of course.
I assume he won't ask if Niels has been skiing.
You've managed to get some skiing?
Skiing in Denmark?
In Norway. You used to go to Norway.
Yes, I did.
But since Norway is also, well,
Also occupied? That might make it easier. In fact, I suppose we could now holiday almost anywhere in Europe.
I'm sorry, I hadn't thought of it quite in those terms.
Perhaps I was being oversensitive.
Of course not, I should have thought.
You must almost be starting to wish you were back in the Prince Alpenstrasse.
I don't suppose you feel you could ever come to Germany.
The boy's an idiot.
My dear Heisenberg, it would be an easy mistake to make to think that the citizens of a small nation overrun, wantonly and cruelly overrun by its more powerful neighbor, don't have exactly the same feelings of national pride as their conquerors, exactly the same love of their country.
Niels, we agreed.
Talk about physics, yes.
Not about
I'm
politics.
sorry.
No, I was simply going to say that I still have my old ski hut at Biberstill. So if by any chance, at any time, for any reason...
Perhaps Margrethe would be kind enough to sew a yellow star on my ski jacket.
Yes. Yes, stupid of me.
Silence again. Those first brief sparks have disappeared, and the ashes have become very cold indeed. So now, of course, I'm starting to feel almost sorry for him. Sitting here all on his own in the midst of people who hate him. All on his own against the two of us. He looks younger again. Like that boy who first came here in 1924. Younger than Christian would have been now. Shy and arrogant and anxious to be loved. Homesick and yet pleased to be away from home at last. And yes, it's sad because Niels loved him. He was a father to him.
So what are you working on?
And all he can do is press forward.
Fission, mostly.
I saw a couple of papers in the Physical Review. The velocity range relations of fission fragments.
And something to do with the relation of deuterons and nucleons. And you?
Oh, various things.
Vision?
I sometimes feel very envious of your cyclotron.
Why? Are you working on fission yourself?
There are over 30 in the United States, whereas in the whole of Germany, you still get to your country place at any rate.
We still go to Tisvilde, yes.
In the whole of Germany, you were going to say.
Not one single cyclotron.
So beautiful this time of year, Tisvilde.
You haven't come here to borrow the cyclotron, have you? That's not why you've come to Copenhagen.
No, that's not why I've come.
I'm sorry. We mustn't jump to conclusions.
No. We must, none of us, jump to conclusions of any sort.
We must wait patiently to be told.
It's not always easy to explain things to the world at large.
I realize we must be conscious of the wider audience our words may have. But the lack of cyclotrons in Germany surely isn't a military secret.
I've no idea what's a secret and what isn't.
It's no secret either why there aren't any. You can't say it, but I can. It's because the Nazis have systematically undermined theoretical physics. Why? Because most of the people working in the field are Jews. And why are so many of them Jews? Because theoretical physics, the type of physics done by you and me, was always regarded in Germany as inferior to experimental physics. So the chairs in the theoretical and the lectureship departments were all the Jews could get.
Physics, yes, physics.
This is physics.
It's also politics.
The two are sometimes painfully difficult to keep apart.
So, you saw those two papers. I haven't seen anything by you recently.
No,
That's not like you. Too much teaching?
I'm not teaching, not at the moment.
They haven't pushed you out of the chair in Leipzig, have they? That's not what you've come to tell us.
No, I'm still at Leipzig for part of each week.
And for the rest of the week?
Elsewhere. The problem is more work, not less.
I see. Do I?
Are you still in touch with any of our friends in England? Bourne, Chadwick?
Heisenberg, we're being occupied by Germany. Germany is at war with Britain.
I thought you might still have contacts of some sort. Or people in America. We're not at war with America.
Yet.
You've heard nothing from Pauli in Princeton, Houchschmidt, Fermi?
What do you want to know?
I was simply curious. I was thinking of Robert Oppenheimer the other day. I had a great set to with him in Chicago in 1939.
About mesons.
Was he still working on mesons?
I'm quite out of touch.
The only foreign visitor we've had was from Germany. Your friend Weissacker was here in March.
My friend? Your friend too, I hope.
When he was here in March, he brought the head of the German Cultural Institute with him.
I'm sorry about that. He did it with the best of intentions. He may not have explained to you that the Institute is run by the Cultural Division of the Foreign Office. Germany is more complex than it may appear from the outside. The different organs of state have quite different traditions in spite of all attempts at reform, particularly the Foreign Service. We have good friends in the embassy here. They're quite old-fashioned in the way they use their influence. They would certainly be trying to see that distinguished local citizens were able to work undisturbed.
Are you saying I'm being protected by your friends in the German embassy?
What I'm saying is, in case Weissacker failed to make it clear, is that you would find congenial company there. The occupation of Denmark is, of course, unfortunate.
Unfortunate?
But things will change. Our tanks are almost at Moscow. The war will very soon be over. Unless, well, my point is that we should look to the future. It might be sensible to establish good relations with the embassy now. I know people would be very honored if you felt able to accept an occasional invitation.
To cocktail parties at the German embassy? To coffee and cakes with the Nazi plenipotentiary?
To lectures, perhaps. To discussion groups. Social contacts of any sort could be helpful.
I'm sure they could.
Essential, perhaps, in certain circumstances.
In what circumstances?
I think we both know.
Because I'm half Jewish?
We all, at one time or another, may need the help of our friends.
Is that why you came to Copenhagen? To invite me to watch the deportation of my fellow countrymen from a grandstand seat to the windows of the German embassy?
Please, please. What else can I do? How else can I help? It's an impossibly difficult situation for you. I understand that. It's also an impossibly difficult one for me.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm sure you also had the best of intentions.
Forget what I said.
Unless I need to remember it.
In any case, it's not why I've come.
Perhaps you should simply say what it is you want to say.
What you and I used to do often in the old days was to take an evening stroll.
Yes. In the old days.
You don't feel like a stroll this evening, for old time's sake?
A little chilly, perhaps, tonight for strolling.
This is so difficult. You remember where we first met?
Of course. Göttingen, 1922.
At a lecture festival held in your honor.
Yes, it was a high honor. I was very conscious of it.
You were being honored for two reasons. Firstly, because you were a great physicist.
Yes, yes.
And secondly, because you were one of the very few people in Europe who were prepared to have dealings with Germany. The war had been over for 4 years, and we were still lepers. But you held out your hand to us. You've always inspired love, you know that. Wherever you've been, wherever you've worked. Here in Denmark, in England, in America, but in Germany, we worshipped you because you held out your hand to us.
Germany's changed.
Yes. Then we were down, and you could be generous.
And now you're up.
And generosity's harder. But you held out your hand to us then, and we took it.
Yes. No. Not you. As a matter of fact, you bit it.
Bit it?
You bit my hand. You did. I held it out in the most statesmanlike and reconciliatory way, and you gave it a very nasty nip.
I did?
And the first time I laid eyes on you at one of those lectures I was giving in Göttingen,
What are you talking about?
you stood up and laid into me.
Oh, I offered a few comments.
A beautiful summer's day, the scent of roses drifting in from the garden, rows of eminent physicists and scientists, all nodding their approval of my benevolence and wisdom. And then suddenly up jumps this cheeky young pup who tells me I got my mathematics wrong.
They were wrong.
How old were you?
20?
2 years younger than the century.
Not quite.
December 5th, yes?
1.93 years younger than the century.
Oh, to be precise.
No, 2 decimal places. To be precise, 1.92876.
I can always keep track of you at any rate. And the century.
And Niels has suddenly decided to love him again, in spite of everything. Why? What happened? Was it the recollection of that summer's day in Göttingen? Or everything? Or nothing at all? Whatever it was, by the time we sat down to dinner, the cold ashes have started to flame once again.
You were always so combative. It was the same when we played table tennis at Tisvilde. You looked like you wanted to kill me.
I wanted to win. Of course I wanted to win. You wanted to win.
I wanted an agreeable game of table tennis.
You couldn't see the expression on your face.
I could see the expression on yours.
Oh, what about all those games of poker then in the ski hut at Bayerischzell? You once cleaned us all out. Do you remember that? With a non-existent straight. We're all mathematicians. We're all counting the cards. We're 90% certain he hasn't got anything, but on he goes, raising us, this insane confidence, until our faith in mathematical probability begins to waver, and one by one we all throw in.
I thought I had the straight. I misread the cards. I bluffed myself.
Poor Niels.
Poor Niels, he won. He bankrupted us. You were insanely competitive. He got us all playing poker once with imaginary cards.
Well, you played chess with Weizsäcker on an imaginary board.
Who won?
Need you ask? At Bayerischzell, we used to ski down from the hut to get provisions. He even made it that into some sort of race. Do you remember we were there with Weizsäcker and somebody, and you got out a stopwatch?
It took poor Weizsäcker 18 minutes.
You were down in 10, of course.
8.
I don't recall how long it took me.
45 minutes.
Thank you.
Some rather swift skiing going on here, I think.
Your skiing was like your science. What were you waiting for? Me and Weizsäcker to come back and suggest some slight change of emphasis?
Probably.
You were doing 17 drafts of each swallow?
And without me there to type them out?
Well, at least I knew where I was. At the speed you were going, you were up against the uncertainty relationship. If you knew where you were when you were down, you didn't know how fast you got there. If you knew how fast you were going, you didn't even know you were down.
Well, I certainly didn't stop to think about it.
Well, not to criticize, but that's what might be criticized about some of your science.
I usually got there all the same.
You didn't care what got destroyed on the way, though. As long as the mathematics worked out, you were satisfied.
If something works, it works.
But the question is always, what does the mathematics mean in plain language? What are the philosophical implications?
I always knew you'd be there, picking your way step by step down the slope behind me, digging all the capsized meanings and implications out of the snow.
The faster you ski, the sooner you're across the cracks and crevasses.
The faster you ski, the better you think.
Not to disagree, but that is most interesting.
By which you mean it's nonsense. But it's not nonsense. Decisions make themselves when you're coming downhill at 70 kilometers an hour. Suddenly there's the edge of nothingness in front of you. Swerve left, swerve right, or think about it and die. In your head, you swerve both ways.
Like that particle.
What part?
The one that you said goes through two different slits at the same time.
In our old thought experiment, yes, yes.
Or Schrodinger's wretched cat.
That's alive and dead at the same time.
Poor beast.
My love, it was an imaginary cat.
I know.
Locked away with an imaginary file of cyanide.
I know.
So, the particle's here, the particle's
The
there,
cat's alive, the cat is dead.
You swerve left, you swerve right.
until the experiment is over. This is the point. Until the sealed chamber is open, the abyss detoured, and turns out the particle has met itself again. The cat's dead.
And you're alive.
Well, not so fast, Tiger.
Swerve itself was the decision.
Not so fast, not so fast.
Isn't that how you shot poor Hendrik Casimir dead?
Henrik Casimir?
When he was working here at the Institute.
I never shot Henrik Casimir.
You told me you did.
It was George Gamow. I shot George Gamow. What do you know? You weren't even there.
Poor, you shot Hendrik Casimir.
Gamow. Because he always insisted it was quicker to act than to react. To make a decision to respond to something rather than waiting for someone else to respond.
And for that, you shot him?
It was him. He went out and bought a pair of pistols. He put one in his pocket, I put one in mine. We got on with our day's work. Hours go by and we're arguing ferociously about, I don't remember, our problem with the nitrogen nucleus, I expect, when suddenly Gamow reaches for his pocket.
Cat pistols.
Cat pistols, yes, of course.
Margareta was looking a little worried.
No. A little surprised at the turn of events.
Well, you remember how quick he was.
Who, Casimir?
Gamow.
Not as quick as me.
Well, of course not, but compared with me.
A fast neutron. However, or so you're going to tell me.
However, yes, before his gun is even out of his pocket.
You've drafted your reply.
I've typed it out.
You've checked it with Klein.
I've retyped it.
You submitted it to Polly in Hamburg.
I've retyped it again.
Before his gun is even out of his pocket, mine is in my hand.
Man, poor Casimir has been blasted out of existence.
Except that it was Gamow.
It was Casimir. He told me.
Well, yes, it was one of the two.
Both of them simultaneously alive and dead in our memories.
Like a pair of Schrodinger cats. Where were we?
Skiing. Or music. That's another thing that decides everything for you. I play the piano, and the way just seems to open in front of me. All I have to do is follow. That's how I had my one success with women. At a musical evening at the Bookings in Leipzig, 1937. Just when all my troubles when my troubles are coming to a head. We've assembled a piano trio. We're playing a Beethoven G major. We've finished the scherzo, and I look up from the piano to see if the others are ready to start the final presto. And in that instant, I catch a glimpse of a young woman sitting at the side of the room. Just the briefest glimpse. But, of course, at once I've carried her off to buy herself. We're engaged, we're married, all the usual hopeless romantic fantasies. Then off we go, into the presto, and it's terrifyingly fast. So fast, there's no time to be afraid. Suddenly, everything in the world seems easy. We reach the end, and I just carry on skiing. Get myself introduced to the young woman, see her home. Yes, a week later, I've carried her off to buy herself. Another week, and we're engaged. 3 months, and we're married. All on the sheer momentum of that presto.
You were saying you felt isolated, but you do have a companion after all.
Music?
Elizabeth.
Oh, yes. Of course. Though, since I've been away so much this past year. You know, I've always envied the way you and Margareta managed to talk about everything. Your work, your problems, me, no doubt.
I was formed by nature to be a mathematically curious entity. Not one, but half of two.
Mathematics becomes very odd when you apply it to people. 1 + 1 can add up to so many different sums.
Silence. What's he thinking about now? His life or ours.
So many things we think about at the same time. Our lives and our physics.
All the things that come into our heads out of nowhere.
Our private consolations. Our private agony.
Silence. And of course, they're thinking about their children again.
Same bright things, same dark things. Back and back they come.
Their 4 children living, their 2 children dead.
Harold lying alone in that ward.
She's thinking about Christian and Harold.
The 2 lost boys. Harold
All those years alone in that terrible ward.
and Christian, the firstborn, the eldest son.
And I see again those same few moments I see every day.
Those short moments on the boat when the tiller slams over in the heavy sea and Christian is falling.
If I hadn't let him take the helm,
Those long moments in the water
those endless moments in the water,
when he's struggling towards the lifebuoy.
so near to touching me.
I'm at Tisvilda. I look up from my work, and there's Niels in the doorway, silently watching me. He turns his head away, and I know at once what's happened.
So near, so slight a thing.
Again and again, the tiller slams over, again and again.
Niels turns his head away.
Christian reaches for the lifebuoy.
But about some things, even they never speak.
About some things, even we only think.
Because there's nothing to be said.
Well, we should be warm enough. You suggested a stroll.
In fact, the weather is remarkably warm.
We shan't be long.
A week at most.
What? Oh, our great hike through Zealand.
We went to Elsinore. I think about often what you said there.
You don't mind, do you? Half an hour?
An hour, perhaps? No, the whole appearance of Elsinore, you said, was changed by our knowing that Hamlet had lived there. Every dark corner there reminds us of the darkness inside the human soul.
So they're walking again. He's done it. And if they're walking, they're talking. I knew Niels would never hold out. If they could just get through those first few minutes, if only out of curiosity. Now they've started, an hour will mean 2, of course, perhaps 3. The first thing they ever did was to go for a walk together. After that lecture in Göttingen, Niels immediately went to look for the presumptuous young man who queried his mathematics and swept him off for a tramp in the country. Walk, talk, make his acquaintance. And when Heisenberg arrived here to work for him, off they go again on their great tour of Zealand. A lot of this century's physics they did in the open air. Strolling around the forest paths at Tisvilda, going down to the beach with the children, Heisenberg holding Christian's hand. Yes. And every evening in Copenhagen after dinner, they'd walk around Fayette Park behind the Institute, or out along Langolini into the harbor. Walk and talk. Long, long before the walls had ears. But this time, in 1941, their walk takes a different course. 10 minutes after they've set out, they're back. Well, I've scarcely had the table cleared when there's Niels in the doorway. I can see at once how upset he is. He won't look me in the eye.
Heisenberg wants to say goodbye. He's leaving.
He won't look at me either.
Thank you. A delightful evening. Almost like old times. So kind of you.
You'll have some coffee, a glass of something.
I have to get back and prepare for my lecture. Forgive me if I've done or said anything.
Yes.
It meant a great deal being here with you both again. Perhaps more than you realize.
It was a pleasure for us. Our love to Elizabeth and the children.
Of course.
Perhaps when this war is over, if we're all spared. Goodbye.
Politics?
Physics. It's not right. How can he be right? Wheeler and I went through the
A
whole thing.
breath of air as we talk. Why not?
Breath of air.
A turn around the garden. Healthier than staying indoors, perhaps?
Oh, yes.
For everyone concerned.
Yes. Thank you. How can he possibly be right? Wheeler and I went through the whole thing in 1939.
What did he say?
Nothing. I don't know. I was too angry to take it in.
Something about fission?
What happens in fission? You fire a neutron at the nucleus of a uranium atom, and it splits and releases energy.
A huge amount of energy, yes?
About enough to move a speck of dust. But it also releases 2 or 3 more neutrons, each of which has the chance of splitting another nucleus.
And so then those 2 or 3 split nuclei each release energy in their turn.
And 2 or 3 more neutrons.
You start a trickle of snow sliding as you ski. The trickle becomes a snowball.
An ever-widening chain of split nuclei fork through the plutonium, quadrupling, doubling in a millisecond between each generation. First 2 splits, let's say, for simplicity. Then 2 squared, 2 cubed, 2 to the 4th, 2 to the 5th, 2 to the 6th.
The thunder of the gathering avalanche echoes from all the surrounding mountains.
Until, let's say, 80 generations. 2 to the 80th specks of dust have been moved. 2 to the 80th is a number, 24 zeros. Enough specks of dust to constitute a city and all who live in it.
But there is a catch.
There is a catch, thank God. Natural uranium consists of 2 different isotopes, U-235 and U-238. And most neutrons, the fast neutrons, will only fission in the 235. And less than 1% of natural uranium is U-235.
This was Bohr's great insight. Another of his amazing intuitions. It came to him when he was at Princeton in 1939, walking across the campus with Wheeler. A characteristic Bohr moment. I wish I'd been there to enjoy it. 5 minutes, deep silence as they walked. And then, now hear this. I have understood everything.
In fact, it's a double catch, because the 238 will also slow neutrons down and absorb them. So an explosive chain reaction will never happen in natural uranium. You have to separate out the pure 235. To make a chain long enough for any kind of large explosion,
80 generations, let's say.
you would need many tons. And it's extremely difficult to separate.
Tantalizingly difficult.
Mercifully difficult. The best estimates when I was in America in 1939 were that to get even 1 gram of pure 235, it would take 26,000 years. By which time, hopefully this war will be over. So you see, he's wrong. He's wrong. Unless I'm wrong. Could I have miscalculated? Let me see, what are the absorption rates of the fast neutron from the 238? And what is the fast mean track for the
But
slow
what
neutron?
exactly had Heisenberg said? That's what everybody wanted to know, then and forever after.
It's what the British wanted to know as soon as Chadwick could get in touch with me. What exactly did Heisenberg say?
And what exactly did Bohr reply? That was, of course, the first thing my colleagues asked me when I got back to Germany.
What did Heisenberg tell Niels? What did Niels reply? The person he wanted to know most of all was Heisenberg himself.
You mean when he came back to Copenhagen after the war in 1947?
Escorted this time, not by unseen agents of the Gestapo, but by a very conspicuous minder from British intelligence.
I think he wanted various things.
2 things. Food parcels.
To feed his family back in Germany. They were on the verge of starvation.
And for you to agree what you'd said to each other in 1941.
And that conversation went wrong almost as fast as it did before.
You couldn't even agree where you'd walked that night.
Where we walked. Fayette Park, of course, where we've been so often in the old days.
But Fayette Park is behind the Institute, 4 kilometers from where we live.
But I can see the drift of autumn leaves under the street lamps next to the bandstand.
That's because you remember it is October.
And it was September.
No fallen leaves.
And it was 1941. No street lamps.
I thought we hadn't gotten farther than my study. What I can see is a drift of paper under the reading lamp on my desk.
We must have been outside. What I was going to say was treasonable. If I'd been overheard, I'd have been executed.
So what was this mysterious thing you said?
There's no mystery about it. There never was any mystery. I remember absolutely clearly, because my
life was at stake, and I chose my words very carefully. I simply asked you if, as a physicist, one had the moral right to research the practical exploitation of atomic energy. Yes?
I don't recall.
You don't recall? No, because you immediately became alarmed. You stopped dead in your tracks.
I was horrified.
Horrified. Good. You remember that. You stood there gazing at me, horrified.
Because the implication was clear that you were working on it.
And you leapt to the conclusion that I was trying to provide Hitler with nuclear weapons.
You were!
No! A reactor. That's what we were trying to build. A machine to produce power, to generate electricity, to drive ships.
You didn't say anything about a
I
reactor.
didn't say anything about anything. I couldn't. I had no idea how much we overheard, how much you'd repeat to others.
But then I asked you if you actually thought that uranium fission could be used in the construction of nuclear weapons.
Ah, it's coming back.
And I clearly remember what you replied.
I said I now knew that it could be.
This is what horrified me.
Because you'd always been confident that weapons would need 235 and that we could never separate enough of it.
A reactor. Yes, maybe. Because you can keep a slow reaction going in the natural uranium.
But what we'd realized is if we could once get the reactor going,
The 238 in the natural uranium would absorb all the fast neutrons.
exactly as you predicted in 1939, everything we were doing was based on that fundamental insight of yours. The 238 would absorb the fast neutrons and be transformed by them into a new element altogether.
Neptunium, which in its turn would decay into another new element.
At least as fissile as the 235 that we couldn't separate.
Plutonium.
Plutonium.
I should have worked it out for myself.
If we could build a reactor, we could build bombs. That's what had brought me to Copenhagen. But none of this could I say. And at this point, you stopped listening. The bomb had already gone off inside your head. I realized we were headed back toward the house. Our walk was over. Our one chance to talk had gone forever.
Because I had already grasped the central point, that one way or another you saw the possibility of supplying weapons to Hitler.
You grasped at least 4 different central points, all of them wrong. You told Rosenthal that I tried to pick your brains about fission. You told Weisskopf that I asked you what you knew about the Allied nuclear program. Chadwick thought I was hoping to persuade you that there was no German program. But then you seem to have told some people that I tried to recruit you to work on it.
Very well. Let's start all over from the beginning. No Gestapo in the shadows this time. No one watching us at all.
Only me.
Only Margreta. We're going to make this whole thing clear to Margreta. You know how strongly I feel that we don't do science for ourselves. We do it so we can explain it to others.
In plain language.
In plain language. Not your view, I understand. You'd be happy if you could describe what you were up to purely in differential equations if you could. But for Margreta's sake,
Plain language.
plain language. All right, here we are walking along the street once again. This time I'm absolutely calm. I'm listening very intently. What is it you want to say?
Not just what I want to say. The whole German nuclear team in Berlin. They all wanted me to come and discuss it with you. We all see you as a kind of spiritual father.
The Pope. That's what you used to call Niels behind his back. And now you want him to give you absolution.
Absolution? No.
According to your colleague, Jensen.
Absolution is the last thing I want.
You told one historian that Jensen had expressed it perfectly.
Did I? Absolution?
But I thought that absolution was granted for sins past and repented, not for sins intended and yet to be committed.
Exactly. That's why I was so shocked.
You were shocked.
Because you did give me absolution. That's exactly what you did. As we were hurrying back toward the house, you muttered something about everyone in wartime being obliged to do his best for his country. Yes?
Well, heaven knows what I said. But I'm here now, profoundly calm and conscious, weighing my words. You don't want absolution. I understand. You want me to tell you not to do it. All right. Put my hand on your arm. I look you in the eye in my most papal way. Go back to Germany, Heisenberg. Gather your colleagues together in the laboratory. Stand up on a table and tell them, Niels Bohr says, in his considered judgment, that providing a homicidal maniac with improved weapons of mass murder is, what shall I say, An interesting idea? No, not even an interesting idea. A really rather seriously uninteresting idea. What happens? You all fling down your Geiger counters?
Obviously not.
Because they'll arrest you.
Whether they arrest us or not, it won't make any difference. In fact, it will make things worse. I'm running my program for the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin. But there's a rival one at Army Ordnance, run by Kurt Diebner, and he's a party member. If I go, they'll simply get Diebner to take over my program as well. He should be running it anyway. Kurtz and the rest of them only smuggled me in to keep Diebner and the Nazis out of it. My one hope is to remain in control.
You don't want me to say yes. You don't want me to say no.
What I want is for you to listen carefully to what I'm going on to say next, instead of running off down the street like a madman.
All right, all right. Here I am, walking very slowly and popishly. I'm listening very carefully as you tell me.
That nuclear weapons will require an enormous technical effort.
True.
That they will suck up huge resources.
Huge resources. Great.
That sooner or later, governments will have to turn to scientists and ask whether or not it's worth committing those resources. Whether there's any hope in producing weapons in time for them to be used.
Of course, but
Wait. So they will have to come to you and me. We are the ones who will have to advise them whether to continue or not. In the end, the decision will be in our hands, whether we like it or not.
And this is what you've come here to tell me?
This is what I want to tell you.
This is why you've come here with such difficulty? This is why you've thrown away nearly 20 years of friendship simply to tell me this?
Simply to tell you this.
My dear Heisenberg, this is more mysterious than ever. What are you telling it me for? What am I supposed to do about it? The government of occupied Denmark is not going to come to me and ask me if we should build nuclear weapons.
No, but sooner or later, if I manage to remain in control of our program, the German government is going to come to me. They'll ask me whether to continue or not. I will have to decide what to tell them.
Well, then you have a very easy way out of your difficulties. You tell them the simple truth you just told me. You tell them how difficult it will be. Maybe they'll be discouraged. Maybe they'll lose interest.
But Bohr, where will that lead? What will be the consequences if we manage to fail?
What can I tell you that you can't tell yourself?
There was a report in a Stockholm paper that the Americans are working on an atomic bomb.
Ah, now it comes, now it comes. Now I see everything. You think I have contact with the Americans.
You must have. You're still publishing in the American journals.
You want me to tell you about the Allied nuclear program?
I simply want to know if there is one. Some hint, some clue. I've just betrayed my country and risked my life to warn you about the German program.
And now you want me to return the compliment?
Or I have to know. I'm the one who has to decide. If the Allies are building a bomb, what am I choosing for my country? You said it would be easy to think that one might love one's country less if it were small and defenseless. And yes, it would be another easy mistake to make, to think that one might have less love for one's country if it happened to be in the wrong. Germany is where I was born. Germany is where I became what I am. Germany is all the faces of my childhood. All the hands that picked me up when I fell. All the voices that encouraged me and set me on my way. All the hearts that speak to my heart. Germany is my widowed mother and my impossible brother. Germany is my wife. Germany is our children. I have to know what I'm deciding for them. Is it another defeat? Another nightmare like the nightmare that I grew up with? Or my childhood in Munich came to an end in anarchy and civil war. Are more children going to starve as we did? Are they going to have to sit up all night as I did? Are they going to have to spend winter nights as I did? Crawling out into the country, through the enemy lines, under the cover of darkness in the snow to find food for my family? Are they going to have to sit up all night as I did at the age of 17, guarding some terrified prisoner? talking to him and talking to him through the small hours because he's going to be executed in the morning.
But my dear Heisenberg, I have nothing to tell you. I have no idea whether the Allies have a nuclear program.
It's just getting underway, even as you and I are talking. Maybe I'm choosing something worse, even than defeat. Because the bomb they're building is to be used on us. On the evening of Hiroshima, Oppenheimer said it was his one regret. That they hadn't produced the bomb in time to use on Germany.
He tormented himself about it afterwards.
Afterwards, yes. At least we tormented ourselves a little beforehand. Did a single one of them ever stop to think, even for one brief moment, about what they were doing? Did Oppenheimer? Did Fermi, or Teller, or Szilard? Did Einstein, when he wrote to Roosevelt in 1939 and urged him to finance research on the bomb? Did you, when you escaped Copenhagen 2 years later and went to Los Alamos?
My dear, good Heisenberg, we were not supplying the bomb to Hitler.
You weren't dropping it on Hitler either. You were dropping it on anyone within reach. On old men and women in the street. On mothers and their children. And if you produced it in time, it would have been my fellow countrymen. My wife. My children. That was the intention, yeah?
That was the intention.
You never had the slightest conception of what happens when bombs are dropped on cities, even conventional bombs. None of you ever experienced it, not a single one of you. I walked back from the center of Berlin to the suburbs one night, after one of the big raids. No transport moving. The whole city on fire. Even the puddles in the streets are burning. They're puddles of molten phosphorus. Gets on your shoes like some kind of incandescent dog muck. I have to keep scraping it off, as if the streets have been fouled by the hounds of hell. It would have made you laugh. My shoes keep bursting into flame. And all around me, I suppose, there are people trapped. People in various stages of burning to death. And all I can think is, how will I ever get hold of another pair of shoes in times like these?
You know why the Allied scientists were working on the bomb.
Of course. Fear.
The same fear that was consuming you, because they were afraid that you were working on it.
But Bohr, you could have told them.
Tell them what?
What I told you in 1941. That the choice is in our hands. In mine, in Oppenheimer's. That if I can tell them the simple truth when they ask me, the simple, discouraging truth, so can he.
So this is what you wanted from me? Not to tell you what the Americans are doing, but to stop them?
To tell them that we can stop them together.
I had no contact with the Americans.
You did with the British.
Only later.
The Gestapo intercepted the message you sent them about our meeting.
And passed it to you.
Why not? They'd begun to trust me. This is what gave me the possibility of remaining in control of events.
Heisenberg, not to criticize, but if this was your plan on coming to Copenhagen, it's, what can I say, most interesting.
It's not a plan. It's a hope. Not even a hope. A microscopically fine thread of possibility. A wild improbability. Worth trying, though, or worth trying, surely. Already, you're too angry to understand what I'm saying.
No, why he's angry is because he is beginning to understand. The Germans drive out most of their best physicists because they're Jews. America and Britain give them sanctuary. Now it turns out that this might offer the Allies a hope of salvation. And at once you come howling back to Niels, begging him to persuade them to give it up.
Margrethe, my love, perhaps we should try to express ourselves a little more temperately.
But the goal of it, the sheer breathtaking goal of it.
It's bold skiing, I have to say.
Boy, we're not skiing now. We're not playing table tennis or juggling with cat pistols or non-existent cards. I refused to believe it when I first heard the news of Hiroshima. I thought it was just one of the strange dreams we were living in at the time. It got stranger and stranger, God knows. Germany fell into ruins in those final months of the war. But by then, we were living in the strangest of them all. The ruins suddenly vanished, just the way things do in dreams. And all at once, we're in a stately home in the middle of the English countryside. We've been rounded up by the British, the whole team, everyone who worked on atomic research. And we've been spirited away to Farm Hall in Huntingdonshire, in the water meadows of the River Ouse. Our families in Germany are starving. And there we are, sitting down each evening to an excellent formal dinner with our charming host, the British officer in charge of us. It's like a pre-war house party. One of those house parties in a play that's cut off from all contact with the outside world, where you know the guests have all been invited for some secret, sinister purpose. No one knows we're there. No one in England, no one in Germany, not even our families. But the war's over. What's happening? Perhaps, as in a play, we're all going to be quietly murdered, one by one. In the meanwhile, it's all delightfully civilized. I entertain the house party with Beethoven piano sonatas. Major Rittner, our hospitable jailer, reads Dickens to us to improve our English. Did these things really happen to me? We wait for the point of it all to be revealed to us. And then one evening it is. It's even more grotesque than the one we were fearing. It's on the radio. You have actually done the deed that we were tormenting ourselves about. That's why we're there. Dining with our gracious host, listening to our Dickens. We've been kept locked up to stop us discussing the subject with anyone until it's too late. When Major Rittner tells us, I simply refuse to believe it until I hear it with my own ears on the 9 o'clock news. We've no idea how far you've gotten. I can't describe the effect it has on us. You play happily with your toy cat pistol, and then someone else picks it up and pulls the trigger, and suddenly there's blood everywhere and people screaming. Because it wasn't a toy at all. We sit up half the night, talking about it, trying to take it in. We're all literally in shock.
Because it had been done, or because it wasn't you who'd done it?
Both. Both. Otto Hahn wants to kill himself because it was he who discovered fission and he can see the blood on his hands. Gerlach, our old Nazi administrator, also wants to die because his hands are so shamefully clean. But you've done it, though. You've built the bomb.
Yes,
And you've used it on a living target.
on a living target.
You're not suggesting that Niels did anything wrong in working at Los Alamos?
Of course not. Bohr has never done anything wrong.
The decision had been made long before Niels arrived. The bomb would have been built whether Niels had gone or not.
In any case, my part was very small.
Oppenheimer described you as the team's father confessor.
That seems to be my role in life.
He said you made a great contribution.
Spiritual, perhaps, not practical.
Fermi said it was you who worked out how to trigger the Nagasaki bomb.
I put forward an idea.
You're not implying that there is anything that Niels needs to explain or defend.
No one has ever expected him to explain or defend anything. He's a profoundly good man.
It's not a question of goodness. I was spared the decision.
Yes, and I was not. And so explaining and defending myself was the way I spent the last 30 years of my life. When I went to America in 1949, a lot of physicists wouldn't even shake my hand. Hands that had actually built the bomb wouldn't touch mine.
And let me tell you, if you think you're making it any clearer to me now, you're not.
Well, Greta, I understand his feelings.
I don't. I'm as angry as you were before. It's so easy to make you feel conscience-stricken. But why should he transfer his burden to you? Because what does he do after his great consultation with you? He goes back to Berlin and tells the Nazis that he can produce atomic bombs.
But what I stress is the difficulty of separating 235.
You tell them about plutonium.
I tell some of the minor officials I have to keep people's hopes alive.
Otherwise, they'll send for the other one.
Diebner, very possibly.
There's always a Diebner at hand ready to take over our crimes.
Diebner might manage to get a little further than me.
Diebner?
Might. Just possibly might.
He has a quarter of your ability.
Not a tenth of it. But he has 10 times the eagerness to do it. It might be a very different story if it's Diebner who puts the case in our meeting with Albert Speer instead of me.
The famous meeting with Speer.
This is when it counts. This is the real moment of decision. It's June 1942, 9 months after my trip to Copenhagen. All research canceled by Hitler unless it produces immediate results. And Speer is the sole arbiter of what will qualify. Now we've just got the first sign that our reactor is going to work. Our first increase in neutrons. Not much, 13%, but it's a start.
June 1942, you're slightly ahead of Fermi in Chicago.
Only we don't know that. And the RAF have begun terror bombing. They've obliterated half of Lübeck and the entire center of Rostock and Cologne. We're desperate for new weapons to strike back with. If there's ever a moment to make our case, this is it.
Do you ask him for the funding to continue?
To continue with the reactor? Of course I do. But I ask for so little, he doesn't take the program seriously.
Do you tell him the reactor will produce plutonium?
I don't tell him the reactor will produce plutonium. Not Speer, no. I don't tell him the reactor will produce plutonium.
A striking omission, I have to admit.
And what happens? It works. He gives us barely enough money to keep the reactor program ticking over. And that is the end of the German atomic bomb. That is the end of it.
You go on with the reactor, though.
We go on with the reactor, all right. Of course. We work like madmen on the reactor. We have to drag it all the way across Germany, from east to west, from Berlin to Swabia, to get it out of the bombing, to keep it out of the hands of the Russians. Diebner tries to hijack it on the way. We keep it away from him, and we set it up in a little village in the Swabian Europe.
This is Heidenloch.
There's a natural shelter there. The village inn has a wine cellar dug into the base of a cliff. We dig a hole in the floor for the reactor, and I keep that program running. I keep it under my control until the bitter end.
My dear Heisenberg, with respect, and with the greatest of respect, you couldn't even keep that reactor under your control. That reactor was going to kill you.
It was never put to the test. It never went critical.
Thank God! Hambro and Perrin inspected it when the Allied troops took over. They said you had no cadmium control rods, nothing to absorb any excess neutrons, nothing to slow down the reaction when it overheated.
No rods, no.
You thought that reaction would be self-limiting.
That's what I originally believed.
Heisenberg, the reaction would not have been self-limiting.
By 1945, I understood that.
And if you had ever gotten it to go critical, it would have overheated and vanished into the center of the Earth.
Not at all. We had a lump of cadmium to hand.
A lump of cadmium? What were you proposing to do with a lump of cadmium?
Throw it in the water.
What water?
The heavy water. The moderator that the uranium was immersed in.
My dear Heisenberg, not to criticize, but you'd all gone mad.
We were almost there. We had this fantastic neutron growth. We had 670% growth.
You had lost all contact with reality by this time.
Another week, another fortnight, that's all we needed.
The only thing that saved you was the arrival of the Allies.
It almost reached the critical mass. A tiny bit bigger, and the chain would sustain itself indefinitely. All we need is a little more uranium. I set off with Weizsäcker to try to get my hands on deepeners. Another hair-raising journey, all the way back across Germany. Constant air raids, no trains. We tried bicycles. We never make it. We end up stuck in a little inn somewhere in the middle of nowhere, listening to the thump of bombs falling all around us. And on the radio, someone playing the Beethoven G minor cello sonata.
And everything was still under your control.
Under my control. Yes, that's the point. Under my control.
Nothing was under anyone's control by this time.
Yes, because at last we were free of all constraints. The nearer the end came, the faster we could work.
You were no longer running that program, Heisenberg. That program was running you.
We need 2 more weeks, 2 more blocks of uranium, and it would have been German physics that achieved the world's first self-sustaining chain reaction.
Except that Fermi had already done it in Chicago 2 years earlier.
We didn't know that.
You didn't know anything down in that cave. You were blind as moles in a hole. Parents said you didn't even have anything to protect you all from the radiation.
We didn't have time to think about it.
So if it had gone critical,
You'd all have died of radiation sickness.
But by then, the reactor would have been running.
my dear Heisenberg, my dear boy, I should have been there to look after you.
It's all we could think of at the time. To get the reactor running. To get the reactor running.
You always needed me to slow you down a little. Your own walking lump of cadmium.
If I had died then, what should I have missed? 30 years of attempting to explain. 30 years of reproach and hostility. Even you turned your back on me.
You came to Copenhagen again. You came to Tisvilde.
It was never the same.
No. It was never the same.
I sometimes think that those final few weeks at Heigerloch were the last happy time in my life. In a strange way, it was very peaceful. Suddenly we're out of all the politics of Berlin, out of the bombing. The war was coming to an end. There was nothing to think about except the reactor. And we didn't go mad, in fact. We didn't work all the time. There was a monastery on top of the rock above our cave. I used to retire to the organ loft in the church and play Bach fugues.
Look at him. He's lost. He's like a lost child. He's been out in the woods all day, running here, running there. He's shown off. He's been brave. He's been cowardly. He's done wrong. He's done right. And now the evening's come, and all he wants to do is to go home, and he's lost.
Silence. Silence.
Silence.
And once again, the tiller slams over and Christian is falling.
Once again, he's struggling towards the life form.
Once again, I look up from my work, and there's Niels in the doorway, silently watching me.
So, Heisenberg, why did you come to Copenhagen in 1941? It was right that you told us about the fears you had, but you really didn't think I would tell you if the Americans were working on a bomb.
No.
And you seriously didn't hope that I would stop them.
No.
You were going to go back to work on that reactor, whatever I said.
Yes.
So, Heisenberg, why did you come?
Why did I come?
Tell us once again. Another draft of the paper. This time we shall get it right. This time we shall understand.
Maybe you'll even understand yourself.
After all, the working of the atom was difficult to explain. We made many attempts, and each time it became more obscure. We got there in the end, however. So, another draft? Another draft.
Why did I come? And once again, I go through that evening in 1941. I crunch over the familiar gravel and tug at the familiar belt pull. What's in my head? Fear, certainly. The touch of fear comes with the horrible and absurd importance of someone bearing bad news. But yes, something else as well. Here it comes again. I can almost see its face. Something good, something bright and eager and hopeful.
I open the door.
And there he is. I see his eyes light up at the sight of me,
He's smiling his wary schoolboy smile,
and I feel a moment of such consolation,
a flash of such pure gladness,
as if I come home after a long journey.
as if a long-lost child was standing on the doorstep.
And suddenly, I'm free of all the dark, tangled currents in the water.
Christian is still alive, Harold still unborn.
The world is at peace again.
Look at them. Father and son still, just for a moment. Even now, we're all dead.
Yes, for a moment, it's the 20s again.
And we shall speak to each other and understand each other in the way we did before.
And from these two heads, the future will emerge. Which cities will be destroyed, which will survive, who will die, who will live. Which world will go down to obliteration, and which will triumph.
My dear Heisenberg,
My dear boy.
come in, come in.
It was the very beginning of spring. First time I came to Copenhagen in 1924. March. Raw, blustery northern weather. But every now and then, the sun would come out and leave that first marvelous warmth of the year on your skin. That first breath of returning life.
You were 22, so I must have been
38.
about the same age you were when you came to Copenhagen in 1941.
So, what do we do?
We put on our boots and rucksacks
Take the tram to the end of the line,
and start walking.
northwards to Elsinore,
And with you walk, you talk.
then westwards to Tisvilde.
And back by way of Homerood.
Walking, talking for 100 miles.
And after that, we went on talking more or less nonstop for 3 years.
We'd split a bottle of wine over dinner at your flat at the Institute.
Then I come up to your room,
That terrible little servant's room in the attic.
and we talk on till the small hours.
How though?
How?
How did we talk? In Danish?
In German, surely.
I lectured in Danish. I had to give my first colloquium when I'd only been here for 10 weeks.
I remember it. Your Danish was already excellent.
No, you did a terrible thing to me. Half an hour before it started, you said casually, "Oh, I think we'll speak English today."
But when you explained,
Explain to the Pope? I didn't dare. That excellent Danish you heard was my first attempt at English.
my dear Heisenberg, on our own together, though. My love, do you recall?
What language you spoke when I wasn't there? You guys, microphones in?
No, but patience, my love, patience.
Patience?
You sounded a little sharp.
Not at all.
We must follow these threads right back to the beginning of the
I'm
maze.
watching every step.
You didn't mind, I hope,
Mine?
being left at home?
While you went off on your hike? Of course not. Why should I have minded? You had to get out of the house. 2 new sons arriving on top of each other would be rather a lot for any man to put up with.
2 new sons.
Heisenberg,
Oh, yes.
and our own son,
Oh, Abe.
Ernst.
1924, of course, Ernst.
Number 5, yes?
Yes. And if it was March, he couldn't have been much more than
1 week.
1 week. 1 week, yes. And you really didn't mind?
Not at all. I was pleased you had an excuse to get away. And you always went off hiking with your new assistants. You went off with Kramer's when he was arrived here in 1960.
When I suppose Christian was still only...
1 week.
I was jealous of Kramer's, you know.
He was a wonderful cellist.
He was a wonderful everything.
Far too wonderful.
I liked him.
I was terrified of him. When I first started at the Institute, I was terrified of all of them. All the boy wonders you had here. They were all so brilliant and accomplished. But Kramer's was the heir apparent.
His Eminence, isn't that what you called him?
Because that's what he was. Your leading cardinal, your favorite son.
Till you arrived.
He didn't think much of my physics. He insisted you could explain everything about the atom by classical mechanics.
Well, he was wrong.
And very soon there was a new heir apparent.
And for the next 3 years, the two of us lived inside the atom like two electrons.
And all the other electrons orbiting around us all over Europe.
Born and Chadwick in England, in Göttingen.
Schrödinger in Zurich, Fermi in Rome,
Chadwick in Duroc in England.
Joliot and De Broglie in Paris.
Gamow and Landau in Russia.
All of us in and out of each other's departments.
Papers and drafts of papers on every international mail train.
Oh, do you remember when Houseman and Uhlenbeck did spin?
There's this one last variable in the quantum state of the atom that no one can make sense of. The last hurdle.
And these two crazy Dutchmen go back to their ridiculous theory that electrons can spin in different ways.
And of course, the first thing everyone wants to know is what line is Copenhagen going to take?
I'm on my way to Leiden, as it happens.
So it turns into a painful progress. The train stops on its way at Hamburg.
And Pauly and Stern are on the platform, wanting to know my views on spin.
You tell them it's wrong.
No, I tell them that it is very...
Interesting.
I believe that's precisely the word I chose.
Then the train pulls into Leiden.
And Einstein and Uhlenbeck are waiting for me at the barrier. And I change my mind. Because Einstein, well, you see, Einstein, I'm the Pope, he's God. Einstein has done a relativistic study, and I changed my mind.
Meanwhile, I'm standing in for Max Born in Göttingen. So you make a detour there on your way home.
You and Jordan meet me at the platform.
Same question. What do you think of spin?
And when the train pulls in at Berlin, there's Pauly on the platform.
Wolfgang Pauli, who never gets out of bed if you possibly avoid it.
And he's already met me once on the way out in Hamburg.
So he's traveled all the way from Hamburg to Berlin purely in order to see you for the second time around.
And to see how my views on spin have developed on the way.
Oh, those years, those amazing years, those 3 short years.
1927, 1924.
From when I first arrived in Copenhagen to work with you,
Until you departed to take up your chair at Leipzig.
3 years of raw, bracing, northern springtime.
By the end of which, we had quantum mechanics, we had
We
uncertainty,
had complementarity,
we had the whole Copenhagen interpretation.
Europe in all its glory again. A new enlightenment with Germany back in her rightful place at the heart of it. And who led the way for everyone else?
You and Niels.
Well, we did.
We did.
And that's what you were trying to get back to in 1941.
It's just something we did during those 3 years. Something we said, something we thought. I keep almost seeing it out of the corner of my eye. Something about the way we worked, something about the way we did all those things.
Together.
Together. Yes, together.
No,
No. What do you mean, no?
not together. You didn't do any of those things together.
Yes, we did. Of course we did.
No, you didn't. Every single one of them you did when you were apart. You first worked out quantum mechanics on Heligoland.
Well, it was summer by then. I had my hay fever.
And on Heligoland, on your own, on a bare rocky island in the middle of the North Sea, you said there was nothing to distract you.
My head began to clear, and I had this very sharp picture of what atomic physics ought to be like. I suddenly realized we had to limit it to the measurements that we could actually make, to what we could actually observe. We can't see the electrons inside the atom.
Any more than Niels can see the thoughts inside your head, or you the thoughts in Niels's.
All we can see are the effects that the electrons produce on the light that they reflect. I remember the evening when the mathematics began to chime with the principle. It was terribly laborious. I didn't understand matrix calculus then. I get so excited I keep making mistakes. But by 3 in the morning, I've got it. I seem to be looking through the surface of atomic phenomena into a strangely beautiful interior world. A world of pure mathematical structures. I'm too excited to sleep. I go down to the southern end of the island. There's a rock jutting out into the sea that I've been longing to climb. I get up it in the half-light before dawn and lie on top, gazing out to sea.
On your own.
On my own, yes. And I was happy.
Happier than you were back here with us all in Copenhagen the following winter.
What, with all the Schrodinger nonsense?
Nonsense. Come. Schrodinger's wave formulation.
Yes, suddenly everyone's turned their backs on your wonderful matrix mechanics.
Because no one can understand it.
And they can understand Schrodinger's wave mechanics.
Because they learned it in school. We're going backwards to classical physics. And when I'm a little cautious about accepting
A little cautious, not to criticize,
You
but
described it as repulsive.
I said the physical implications were repulsive. Schrodinger said my mathematics were repulsive.
I recall the word you used was, well, I won't repeat it in mixed company.
In private. But by then, people had gone crazy.
They thought you were simply jealous.
Someone even suggested some bizarre kind of intellectual snobbery. You got very excited.
On your behalf,
You invited Schrodinger here.
to have a calm debate on our differences.
And you fell on him like a madman. You meet him at the station, of course, and you pitch into him even before he's got his bags off the train. And then you go on at him from first thing in the morning till last thing at
I
night.
go on, he goes on.
You won't make the least concession.
Nor will he.
You made him ill. He had to retire to bed to get away from you.
Oh, he had a slight feverish cold.
Margareta had to nurse him.
I dosed him with tea and cake to keep his strength up.
Yes, while you pursued him, even into the sick room, sat on his bed and hammered away at him.
Perfectly politely.
You were the Pope, and the Holy Office and the Inquisition all rolled into one. And then, after Schrodinger had fled back to Zurich, this I will never forget. This I will never let you forget, for you started to take his side. You turned on me.
You had become mad by this time. You had become fanatical. You were refusing to allow wave theory any place in quantum mechanics.
You completely turned your coat.
I simply said that wave mechanics and particle mechanics were alternative tools.
Something you're always accusing me of. If something works, it works, it works. Never mind what it means.
Of course I mind what it means.
What it means in language.
In plain language, yes.
What something means is what it means in mathematics.
You think that as long as mathematics work, sense doesn't matter.
Mathematics is sense. That's what sense is.
But in the end, remember, in the end, we have to be able to explain it all to Margareta.
Explain it to me. You couldn't explain it to each other. You stayed up arguing into the small hours every night. You both got so angry.
We also both got completely exhausted.
It was the cloud chamber that finished you.
Yes. If you detach an electron from an atom and send it through a cloud chamber, you can see the track that it leaves.
It's a scandal. There shouldn't be a track.
According to your quantum mechanics.
There isn't a track. No orbits, no tracks or trajectories, only external effects.
Only there the track is. I've seen it myself. As clear as the wake left by a passing ship.
It was a fascinating paradox.
You actually love the paradoxes. That's your problem. You reveled in the contradictions.
And you've never been able to understand the suggestiveness of paradox and contradiction. That's your problem. You live and breathe paradox and contradiction, but you can no more see the beauty in them than the fish can see the beauty in the water.
I sometimes felt as if I was trapped in a kind of windowless hell. You don't realize how aggressive you are, prowling up and down the room as if you're going to eat someone. And I can imagine who it's going to be.
How we did the physics, though.
No. In the end, you did it on your own again. Even you. You went off skiing in Norway.
Well, I had to get away from it all.
And you worked out quantum mechanics in Norway on your own.
Well, the speed he skis at, he had to do something to keep the blood going round. It was either physics or frostbite.
And you, of course, stayed behind in Copenhagen.
And started to think at last.
You're a lot better off apart, you two.
Having him out of town was as liberating as getting away from my hay fever on Helgoland.
I shouldn't let you sit anywhere near each other if I were the teacher.
And that's when I did uncertainty. On my own. Walking around Fayette Park one horrible, raw February night. It's very late, and as soon as I've turned off into the park, I'm completely alone in the darkness. I start to think what you'd see if you could train a telescope on me from the mountains of Norway. You'd see me by the street lamps on the Bledamsvej. Then, nothing as I vanished into the darkness. Then, another glimpse as I passed the lamppost in front of the bandstand. And that's what we see in the cloud chamber. Not as a continuous track, but a series of glimpses, a series of collisions between the electrons and passing molecules of water vapor. Or think of you, on your great able progress to Leiden in 1925. What did Margrethe see of that here at home in Copenhagen? A picture postcard from Hamburg, perhaps. Then one from Leiden, one from Göttingen, one from Berlin. Because what we see in the cloud chamber are not even the collisions themselves, but the water droplets that condense around them. As big as cities around a traveler. No, vastly bigger still, relatively. Complete countries. Germany, Holland, Germany again. There's no track, there are no precise addresses, only a vague list of countries visited. I don't know why we hadn't thought of it before. We were too busy arguing to think at all.
Because you had given up on all forms of discussion. By the time I get back from Norway, you've already done a draft of uncertainty and sent it in for publication already.
And an even worse battle begins.
My dear Heisenberg, it is not open behavior to rush a first draft into print until we've had a chance to discuss it together. It's not the way we work.
No, the way we work is that you hound me from first thing in the morning till last thing at night. The way we work is that you drive me mad.
Because there was a fundamental error in the paper.
And here we go again.
No, but I show him the strangest truth about the universe that any of us have stumbled on since relativity, that you can never know the precise whereabouts of a particle or anything else, even Bohr now as he prowls up and down the room in that maddening way of his, because you can't observe it without introducing some new element into the situation. A molecule of water vapor for it to hit, or a piece of light. Things which have an energy of their own and which therefore have an effect on what they hit. Small one, admittedly, in the case of Bohr.
But if you can see me with the accuracy you're talking about when we're dealing with particles, then you can still measure my velocity to in what?
There was something like a billionth of a kilometer per second. The theoretical point remains, though, that you have no absolutely determinate situation in the world, which, among other things, lays waste to the idea of causality, the whole foundation of science. Because if you don't know how things are today, you certainly can't know how they're going to be tomorrow. I shatter the objective universe around you, and all you can say is there's an error in the formulation.
There is!
Tea, anyone? Cake?
Listen, what we're trying to locate in my paper is not a free electron off on its travels through a cloud chamber, but an electron when it's at home, moving around inside an atom.
But the uncertainty arises not as you claim through the indeterminate recoil when it's hit by an incoming photon.
Plain language.
This is plain language.
Listen.
The language of classical mechanics.
Listen, Copenhagen is an atom. Margrethe is its nucleus. About right, the scale, 10,000 to 1?
Yes.
Now, Bohr is an electron. He's wandering about the city somewhere in the darkness. No one knows where. He's here, he's there, he's everywhere and nowhere. Up in Fay Park, down at Carlsberg, passing City Hall, out by the harbor. Now, I'm a photon, a quantum of light, and I'm dispatched into the darkness to find Bohr. And I succeed, because I managed to collide with him. But look, what's happened? He's been slowed down, he's been deflected. He's no longer doing what he was so maddeningly doing when I walked into him.
But Heisenberg, you've been deflected also. And if people can see where you are, their little piece of light, they can work out what's happened to me. The trouble is knowing what's happened to you. We need to understand how people can treat you as a particle and as a wave. I have to use not only your particle mechanics, but also Schrödinger's wave function.
I know, I put it in a postscript to my paper.
Everyone remembers the paper. No one remembers the postscript. But the question is fundamental. Particles are things, complete in themselves. Waves are disturbances in something else.
I know, complementarity.
And you have to see them as one thing or another. You can't see them as both. You have to choose whether to see them as one thing or another, and as soon as you do, you can't know everything about them.
And off he goes into orbit again, incidentally exemplifying another application of complementarity. Exactly where you go as you ramble around is, of course, completely determined by your genes and the various physical forces acting on you. But it's also completely determined by your own entirely inscrutable whims from one moment to the next. So we can't understand everything about your behavior without seeing it both ways at once, and that's impossible. Your extraordinary peregrinations are not completely objective aspects of the universe, but exist only partially. through the efforts of me or Margreta, as our minds shift endlessly back and forth between the two approaches.
You never absolutely and totally accepted complementarity, have you?
Yes, absolutely and totally. I defended it at the Como Conference in 1927. I have adhered to it ever afterwards with religious fervor. You convinced me. I humbly accepted your criticism.
Not until after you said some deeply wounding things.
Good God. At one point, you literally reduced me to tears.
Well, forgive me, but I diagnosed them as fears of frustration and rage.
I was having a tantrum.
I raised children of my own.
And what about Margreta? Was she having a tantrum? Klein told me you reduced her to tears after I'd gone, making her type out your endless redraftings of the complementarity paper.
I don't recall that.
I do.
We had to drag Polly out of bed in Hamburg once again to come to Copenhagen and negotiate peace.
Well, he succeeded. We came up with the treaty. Uncertainty and complementarity were the central tenets of the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics.
A political compromise, of course, like most treaties.
You see, somewhere inside you, there's still some secret reservation.
Not at all. It works. That's what matters. It works, it works, it works.
It works, yes, but that's not the most important thing. Because you see, Heisenberg, what we did in those 3 years, not to exaggerate, but we turned the world inside out. Yes. Listen, now it comes. Now it comes. We will land back at the center of the universe. Throughout history, we found ourselves to place. We kept exiling ourselves to the periphery of things. First as a mere adjunct of God's unknowable purposes. Tiny figures kneeling in the great cathedral of creation. And no sooner had we recovered ourselves in the Renaissance, no sooner had man become what Protagoras proclaimed him the measure of all things, when we're pushed aside again by the product of our own reasoning. We're dwarfed as the physicists build the great new cathedrals for us to wonder at. The laws of classical mechanics that predate us from eternity's beginning, that will last until eternity's end, that exist whether we exist or not, until the beginning of the 20th century. And we are forced to rise up from our knees again.
It starts with Einstein.
It starts with Einstein, because Einstein shows that measurement on which the whole possibility of science depends, that measurement is not an impersonal effect that occurs with impartial universality. It is a human act that is carried out from one particular point of view in time and space, from one specific viewpoint of a possible observer. And then, here in Copenhagen, in those 3 years in the mid-20s, we discovered that the universe, that there is no precisely determinable objective universe. The universe exists only as a series of approximations, only within the limits of our relationship with it, only through the knowledge lodged inside the human head.
So this man you've put at the center of the universe, is it you or is it Heisenberg?
Well, now, my love.
Yes, but it makes a difference.
Well, either of us, both of us, yourself, all
If
of
it's
us.
Heisenberg at the center of the universe, then the one bit of the universe he can't see is Heisenberg.
So
So it's no good asking him why he came to Copenhagen in 1941. He doesn't know.
I thought for a moment I caught a glimpse of it,
Then you turn to look.
and away it went.
Complementarity again, yes?
Yes, yes.
I've typed it out often enough. If you're doing something that you have to concentrate on, you can't also be thinking about doing it. And if you're thinking about doing it, you can't actually be doing it. Yes?
Swerve left, swerve right, or think about it and die.
But after you've done it,
You look back and make a guess, just like the rest of us. Only a worse guess, because you didn't see yourself doing it, and we did. Forgive me, but you don't even know why you did uncertainty in the first place.
But if you're the one at the center of the universe...
Then I can tell you that it's because you wanted to drop a bomb on Schrodinger.
I wanted to show he was wrong, certainly.
And Schrodinger was winning the war. When the Leipzig chair first became vacant that autumn, he was shortlisted for it, and you weren't. You needed a wonderful new weapon.
Margareta, not to criticize, but you have a tendency to make everything personal.
Because everything is personal. You've just read us all a lecture about it. You know how much Heisenberg wanted a chair. You know the pressure he was under from his family. I'm sorry, but you want to make everything seem heroically abstract and logical. And when you tell the story, yes, it all falls into place. It all has a beginning and a middle and an end. But I was there. And when I remember what it was like, I'm still there. And what I see isn't a story. It's confusion, and rage, and jealousy, and tears, and nobody knowing what things mean or which way they're going to go.
All the same, it works. It works.
Yes, it works perfectly. Within 3 months of publishing your uncertainty paper, you're offered Leipzig.
I didn't mean that.
And when you take up your chair at Leipzig, you're how old?
26?
The youngest full professor in Germany.
I mean the Copenhagen interpretation. The Copenhagen interpretation works. However we got there, by whatever combination of high principle and low calculation, of most painfully hard thought and most painfully childish tears, it works.
Yes. And why did you both accept the interpretation in the end? Was it really because you wanted to reestablish humanism?
Of course not. It was because it was the only way to explain what the experimenters observed.
Or was it because now you were becoming a professor, you wanted a solidly established doctrine to teach? Because you wanted to have your new ideas publicly endorsed by the head of the church in Copenhagen? Or perhaps Niels agreed to endorse them in return for your accepting his doctrines, for recognizing him as head of the church? And if you want to know why you came to Copenhagen in 1941, I'll tell you that as well. You're right. There's no great mystery to it. You came to show yourself off to us.
Margareta!
No. When he first arrived here in 1924, he was a humble assistant lecturer from a humiliated nation, grateful to have a job. Now, here you are, back in triumph. The leading scientist in a nation that's conquered most of Europe. You've come to show us how well you've done in life.
This is so unlike you.
I'm sorry, but isn't that really why he's here? Because he's burning to let us know that he's in charge of some vital piece of secret research. And that even so, he's preserved a lofty moral independence. Preserved it so famously that he's being watched by the Gestapo. Preserved it so successfully that he's also got a wonderfully important moral dilemma to face.
Well, now you're just working yourself up.
A chain reaction. You tell one painful truth, and it leads to 2 more. And as you frankly admit, you're going to go back and continue doing precisely what you were doing before. Whatever Niels tells you.
Yes.
Because you wouldn't dream of giving up such a wonderful opportunity for research.
Not if I can possibly help it.
Also, you want to demonstrate to the Nazis how useful theoretical physics can be. You want to save the honor of German science. You want to be there to reestablish it in all its glory as soon as the war is over.
All the same, I don't tell Spear that the reactor...
Will produce plutonium. No, because you're afraid of what will happen if the Nazis commit huge resources and you fail to deliver the bombs. Please don't try to tell us that you're a hero of the resistance.
I've never claimed to be a hero.
Your talent is for skiing too fast for anyone to see where you are. For always being in more than one position at a time, like one of your particles.
Oh. I can only say that it worked. Unlike most of the gestures made by heroes of the resistance, it worked. I know what you think. You think I should have joined the plot against Hitler and got myself hanged like the others.
Of course not.
You don't say it because there are some things that can't be said, but you think it.
No.
What would it have achieved? What would it have achieved if you dived in after Christian and drowned as well? But that's another thing that can't be said.
Only thought
I'm sorry.
and rethought every day.
You had to be held back, I know.
Whereas you held yourself back.
Better to stay on the boat and fetch it about, though. Better to remain alive and throw the life buoy, surely.
Perhaps, perhaps not.
Better.
Really, it is ridiculous. You've reasoned your way, both of you, with such astonishing delicacy and precision into the tiny world of the atom. Now it turns out that everything depends on these really rather large objects on our shoulders. And what's going on there is
Elsinore.
Elsinore. Yes.
And you may be right. I was afraid of what would happen. I was conscious of being on the winning side. So many explanations for everything I did. I didn't tell Spear simply because I didn't think of it. I came to Copenhagen simply because I did think of it. A million reasons for everything we do, a million decisions that make themselves. Why didn't you kill me?
Why didn't I?
Kill me. Murder me. That evening in 1941. Here we are, walking back toward the house, and you've just leapt to the conclusion that I'm going to provide Hitler with nuclear weapons. You'll surely take any reasonable steps to prevent it happening.
I'm murdering you?
Do it without any loud bangs, without any blood, without any spectacle of suffering, as cleanly as a bomb aimer pressing his release 3,000 meters above the earth. You simply wait till I've gone, and you sit quietly down in your favorite armchair here, and repeat aloud to Margareta, in front of our unseen audience, exactly what I've just told you. I shall be dead as soon as poor Casimir, a lot sooner than Gamrot.
My dear Heisberg, the suggestion is, of course...
Most interesting. So interesting, it never even occurred to you. Complementarity, once again. I'm your enemy, I'm also your friend. I'm a danger to mankind, I'm also your guest. I'm a particle, I'm also a wave. We have one set of obligations to the world at large, and we have other sets, never to be reconciled, to our fellow countrymen, to our neighbors, to our friends, to our family, to our children. We have to go through not 2 slits at the same time, but 22. All we can do is look afterwards, see what happened.
I'll tell you another reason why you did uncertainty. You have a natural affinity for it.
Well, I must gratifyingly chasten figure when I return in 1947, crawling on my hands and knees again, my nation back in ruins.
Not really. You're demonstrating that once again, you personally have come out on top.
Begging for food parcels?
Established in Göttingen, under British protection, in charge of post-war German science.
That first year in Göttingen, I slept on straw.
Elizabeth said you had a most charming house thereafter.
I was given it by the British.
Your new foster parents, who'd confiscated it from someone else.
Fine.
No, I have kept my thoughts to myself for all these years. But it's maddening to have this clever son forever dancing about in front of our eyes, forever demanding our approval, forever struggling to shock us, forever begging to be told what the limits to his freedoms are, only so that he can go out and transgress them. I'm sorry, but really? On your hands and knees? It is my good, dear, kind husband who is on his hands and knees. Literally, crawling down to the beach in the darkness in 1943, fleeing like a thief in the night from his own homeland to escape being murdered. protection of the German embassy you boasted about didn't last for long. We were incorporated into the Reich.
I warned you in 1941. You wouldn't listen. At least Bohr got across to Sweden.
And even as the fishing boat was taking them across the Sound, 2 freighters were arriving into the harbor to ship the entire Jewish population of Denmark eastward. That great darkness inside the human soul was flooding out to engulf us all.
I did try to warn you.
Yes. And where are you? Shut away in a cave like a savage, trying to conjure an evil spirit out of a hole in the ground. That's what it all came down to in the end. All that shining springtime of the 1920s. That's what it produced. A more efficient machine for killing people.
Breaks my heart when I think of it.
It broke all our hearts.
And this wonderful machine may yet kill every man, woman, and child in the world. And if we really are the center of the universe, if we really are all that's keeping it in being, what will be left?
Darkness. Total and final darkness.
Even the questions that haunt us will at last be extinguished. Even the ghosts will die.
I can only say that I didn't do it. I didn't build the bomb.
No. And why didn't you? I'll tell you that too. It's the simplest reason of all. Because you couldn't. You didn't understand the physics.
That's what Hausschmidt said.
And Hausschmidt knew. He was one of your magic circle. He and Uhlenbeck were the ones who did spin.
Even so, he had no idea what I did or didn't understand about a bomb.
He tracked you down across Europe for Allied intelligence. He interrogated you after you were captured.
He blamed me, of course. His parents died in Auschwitz. He thought I should have done something to save them. I don't know what. So many hands stretching up from the darkness for a lifeline, and no lifeline that could ever reach them.
He said that you didn't understand the crucial difference between a reactor and a bomb.
I understood very clearly. I simply didn't tell the others.
Oh,
I understood, though.
but secretly.
You can check if you don't believe me.
But there's evidence for once.
It was almost carefully recorded.
Witnesses even.
Unimpeachable
Who
witnesses.
wrote it down.
Who recorded it and transcribed it.
Even though you didn't tell anyone.
I told one person. I told Otto Hahn that terrible night at Farm Hall, after we'd heard the news. Somewhere in the small hours after everyone had finally gone to bed and we were alone together, I gave him a relatively good account of how the bomb had worked.
After the event.
After the event, yes. When it didn't matter anymore. Everything Hausschmidt said, I didn't understand. Fast neutrons in 235. The plutonium option. A reflective shell to reduce neutron escape. Even the method of triggering it.
The critical mass, that's the important thing. The amount of material it takes to establish the chain reaction. Did you give him the critical mass?
I gave him a figure, yes. You can look it up. Because that was the other secret of the house party. Diebner asked me when we first arrived if I thought there were hidden microphones. I laughed. I said the British are far too old-fashioned to know about Gestapo methods. I underestimated them. They had microphones everywhere. They were recording everything. Everything we went through that terrible night. It's all in the record. Everything we said. Everything I told Hahn in those small hours.
But the critical mass, you gave him a figure. What figure did you give him?
I forget.
Heisenberg.
It's all in the record. You can see for yourself.
The figure for the Hiroshima bomb was,
50 kilograms.
so that's the figure you gave Hahn, 50 kilograms.
I said about a ton.
About a ton. 1,000 kilograms? But Heisenberg, your mathematics.
Look, you can look it up. It's in the record.
But your mathematics. How could you have been so far off?
They weren't.
Your mathematics. How could they have been so far off?
They weren't. As soon as I calculated the diffusion, I got it just about right.
As soon as you calculated it?
I gave everyone a seminar on it a week later. It's in the record.
You mean you hadn't done the calculation? You hadn't done the diffusion calculation?
There was no need to.
No need to.
It had already been done.
Done by whom?
By Perrin and Fluga in 1939.
Perrin and Fluga? My dear Heisenberg, that was for natural uranium. Wheeler and I showed that it was only the 235 diffusion.
Your great paper, the basis of everything we did.
So you had to do the calculation for the pure 235.
Obviously.
And you didn't.
I didn't.
And that is why you were so confident you didn't think you could do it without the plutonium. Because you spent the entire war thinking you needed not just a few kilograms of pure 235, but many tons of it. And to produce a ton in any plausible
It
time.
would have taken something like 200 million separator units. It was plainly unimaginable.
But if you had realized you only needed to produce a few kilograms,
Even a single kilogram would take something like 200,000 units.
but 200 million is one thing, 200,000 is another. You might just possibly have imagined setting up 200,000.
Just possibly.
The Americans did imagine it.
Because Otto Frisch and Rudolf Peierls did the calculation. They solved the diffusion equation.
Frisch was my old assistant.
Peierls was my old pupil,
An Austrian and a German.
so they should have been making their calculation for us at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin. But instead, they made it at the University of Birmingham in England.
Because they were Jews.
There's something almost mathematically elegant about that.
They also started with Perrin and Fluga.
They also thought it would take tons. They also thought it was unimaginable.
Until one day,
They did the calculation,
and they realized just how fast the chain reaction would go.
and therefore how little material you'd need.
They said just a little over half a kilogram.
About the size of a tennis ball.
They were wrong, of course,
It was 100th of the correct figure,
which made it seem 100 times more imaginable than it actually was.
whereas I left it seeming 20 times less imaginable.
So all your agonizing in Copenhagen about the plutonium is beside the point. You could have done it without building a reactor. You could have done it with the 235 all the time.
Almost certainly not,
Just possibly.
just possibly.
And that question you had already settled long before you came to Copenhagen, simply by failing to do the diffusion equations.
Such a tiny failure.
But the consequences, when branching out through the years, doubling and redoubling,
So they were large enough to save a city. Which city? Any of the cities we never dropped our bomb on.
London, presumably, if you had it in time, and if the Americans had already entered the war and the Allies had begun liberating Europe, then
Who knows? Paris as well? Amsterdam? Perhaps Copenhagen.
So Heisenberg, tell us this one simple thing. Why didn't you do the calculation?
The question is why Frisch and Peierls did do it. It was a stupid waste of time. However much 235 it turned out to be was obviously going to be more than anyone could imagine producing.
Except it wasn't.
Except that it wasn't.
So why?
I don't know. I don't know why I didn't do it. Because I never thought of it. Because it didn't occur to me. Because I assumed it wasn't worth doing.
Assumed? Assumed? You don't assume, Heisenberg. That's how you got uncertainty. You rejected our assumptions. You calculated, Heisenberg. You calculated everything. It's the first thing you did with any problem, the mathematics.
You should have been there to slow me down.
Yes. You wouldn't have gotten away with it if I had been standing over you.
Though, you made the same assumption. You also thought there was no danger for exactly the same reason as I did. Why didn't you calculate it?
Why didn't I calculate?
Tell us why you didn't calculate it, and we'll know why I didn't.
Well, it's obvious why I didn't calculate it.
Go on.
Because he wasn't trying to build a bomb.
Yes. Thank you. Because he wasn't trying to build a bomb. I imagine It's the same with me, because I wasn't trying to build a bomb. Thank you.
So you bluffed yourself. The same way I did at poker with the straight I didn't have. But if that's the case,
Why did I come to Copenhagen? Yes, why did I come?
one more draft. One final draft.
I crunch over the familiar gravel and tug at the familiar bell pull. Why have I come? I know perfectly well. I know so well, I have no need to ask myself. Until, once again, the heavy front door opens.
He stands there on the doorstep, blinking in the sudden flood of light from the house. Until this instant, his thoughts have been everywhere and nowhere, like all the unobserved particles through all the diffusion slits, the diffusion grating. But now they have to be observed and specified.
And at once, the clear purposes inside my head lose all definite shape. The light falls on them and they scatter.
My dear Heisenberg,
My dear Bohr,
come in, come in.
how difficult it is to see even what's in front of one's eyes. All we possess is the present, and the present endlessly dissolves into the past. Bohr has gone even as I turn to see Margrethe.
Niels is right. You look older.
I believe you had some personal trouble.
Margrethe slips into history even as I turn back to Bohr. And yet how difficult still it is to catch the slightest glimpse of what's behind one's eyes. Here I am at the center of the universe, and all I can see are two smiles that don't belong to me.
How is Elizabeth? How are the children?
Very well, they send their love, of course. I can see a third smile in the room, very close to me. Could it be the one I suddenly see for a moment in the mirror there? And is the awkward stranger wearing it in any way connected with this presence I feel in the room, this unobserved, all-encompassing presence?
I watch the two smiles in the room. One awkward and ingratiating, the other rapidly fading from incautious warmth to bare politeness. There's also a third smile in the room, I know, unchangingly courteous, I hope, and unchangingly guarded.
You managed to get some skiing?
I glance at Margrethe, and for a moment I can see what she sees and I can't. Myself, and the smile vanishing from my face as I watch Heisenberg blunder on.
I look at the two of them looking at me, and for a moment I see the third person in the room as clearly as I see them. Their importunate guest, stumbling from one crass and unwelcome thoughtfulness to the next.
I look at him looking at me, anxiously, pleadingly, urging me back to the old days, and I can see what he sees. Yes, now it comes. Now it comes. There's someone missing from the room. He sees me. He sees Margrethe. He doesn't see himself.
2,000 million people in the world, and the one who has to decide their fate is the one who's always hidden from me.
You suggested a stroll.
Do you remember Elsinore? The darkness inside the human soul?
Out we go. Out under the autumn trees, through the blacked out streets.
Now there's no one in the world except Bohr and the invisible other. Who is he, this all-enveloping presence in the darkness?
Flying particle wanders the darkness. No one knows where. It's here, it's there, it's everywhere, it's nowhere.
With careful casualness, he begins to ask a question. He's prepared.
Does one, as a physicist, have the moral right to work on the practical exploitation of atomic energy?
Great collision.
I stop. He
This
stops.
is how they work.
He gazes at me, horrified.
At last he knows where he is and what he's doing.
He turns away.
And even as the moment of collision begins, it's over.
Already, we're hurrying back towards the house.
Already they're both flying away from each other into the darkness.
Our conversation's over.
Our great partnership.
All our friendship.
And everything about him becomes as uncertain as it was before.
Unless, yes, a thought experiment. Let's suppose, just for a moment, I don't go flying off into the dark. Let's see what happens if, instead, I remember the paternal role I'm supposed to play, and I control my anger, and I turn to him and ask, why?
Why?
Why are you confident it'll be so difficult to build a bomb with the 235? Is it because you've done the calculation?
The calculation?
The calculation of the diffusion of the 235? No. It's because you haven't calculated. It's because you haven't considered calculating. You haven't consciously realized there was a calculation to be made.
And of course, now I have realized. In fact, it wouldn't be all that difficult. Let's see, the scattering cross-section is about 6 times 10 to the negative 24th, so the mean free path would be, hold on,
And suddenly a very different and very terrible new world begins to take shape.
That was the last and greatest demand that Heisenberg made on his friendship with you. To be understood when he couldn't understand himself. And that was the last and greatest act of friendship for Heisenberg that you performed in return. To leave him misunderstood.
yes, perhaps I should thank you.
Yes, perhaps you should.
Anyway, it was the end of the story.
And perhaps there is something I should thank you for. That summer's night in 1943, when I escaped across the Sound in a fishing boat, and the freighters arrived from Germany.
What's that to do with Heisenberg?
Well, when the ships arrived on that Wednesday, there were 8,000 Jews to be arrested and crammed into their holes. But when the SS began the roundup the next day, there was scarcely a Jew to be found.
They'd all been hidden in churches and hospitals, in people's homes and country cottages.
How is that possible? Because we had been informed by someone in the German embassy.
Georg Duckwitz, their shipping specialist.
Your man?
One of them.
He was a remarkable informant. He told us the day before the ships arrived, the very day that Hitler issued the order, he gave us the exact time that the SS would move.
It was the resistance that got them out of their hiding places and smuggled them across the Sound.
For a small handful of us to escape in a small fishing boat past the patrol boats was remarkable enough. But for an entire armada to get past, with something like 8,000 Jews aboard, it was like the parting of the Red Sea.
But I thought there were no German patrol boats that night.
No, they had suddenly been reported all unseaworthy.
How they managed to get away with it, I can't imagine.
Duckwitz again.
He also went to Stockholm and asked the Swedish government to accept everyone.
So I do have something to thank you for.
What?
My life. All of our lives.
Nothing to do with me by that point, I regret to say.
And after I'd gone, you came back to Copenhagen.
To make sure our people didn't take over the Institute in your absence.
I never thanked you for that either.
You know they offered me your site control?
You could have separated a little 235 with it.
Meanwhile, you were going on from Sweden to Los Alamos.
To play my small but helpful role in the deaths of 100,000 people.
Niels, you did nothing wrong.
Didn't I?
Of course not. You were a good man from first to last. And no one could ever say otherwise. Whereas
you, my dear Heisenberg, never contributed to the death of one single solitary person in your life.
Well, yes.
Did I?
One. Or so you told us. The poor fellow you guarded overnight when you were a boy in Munich when he was waiting to be shot in the morning.
All right, then one. One single soul on his conscience to be set against all the others.
But that one single soul is emperor of the universe. No less than each of us. Until the morning came.
No. When the morning came, I persuaded them to let him go.
My dear Heisenberg, I must say, if people are to be measured purely through a quantitative objection,
Then we should need a strange new quantum ethics. There'd be a place in heaven for me. And another one for the SS man I met on my way home from Tiger Lot. That was the end of my war. The Allied troops were moving in. There was nothing more we could do. Elizabeth and the children had taken refuge in a village in Bavaria. I went to see them before I was captured. I had to go by bicycle. There were no trains or road transport by that time. I had to travel by night and sleep under a hedge during the day. Because all through the daylight hours, the skies were full of Allied planes, scouring the roads for anything that moved. Man on a bicycle would have been the biggest target left in Germany. 3 days and 3 nights I traveled out of Württemberg, through the Swabian Jura and the first foothills of the Alps, across my ruined homeland. Was this my doing? This endless rubble? This perpetual smoke in the sky? And all the hungry faces? Was this my doing? And all the desperate people on the roads. Most desperate of all were the SS. Bands of fanatics, with nothing left to lose, roaming around, shooting deserters out of hand, hanging them from roadside trees. The second night, there it is. The terrible, familiar black tunic emerging from the twilight in front of me. And on his lips as I stopped, that one terrible, familiar word. Deserter, he says. He sounds as exhausted as I am. I give him the travel order I've written for myself. There's hardly enough light left in the sky to read by, and he's too weary to bother. He begins to unfasten his holster instead. He's going to shoot me simply because it's less labor. Suddenly, I'm thinking very quickly and clearly. He's like skiing, or that night on Heligoland, or the one in Fayette Park. What comes to mind this time is the pack of American cigarettes I've got in my pocket, and already I'm holding it out to him. The most desperate solution to a problem yet. I wait while he stands there looking at it, trying to make it out, trying to think. His left hand holding my useless piece of paper, his right hand on the fastening of his holster. There are 2 large words in black print on the pack. Lucky Strike. He closes the holster and takes the cigarettes instead. It had worked. It had worked. Like all the other solutions to all the other problems. It had worked. For 20 cigarettes, he let me live. And on I went. 3 days and 3 nights. Past the weeping children. The lost and hungry children. Drafted to fight and then abandoned by their commanders. Past the starving slave laborers walking home to France, to Poland, to Estonia. Through Copenhagen, Biberach, Memmingen, Mindelheim, Kaufbeuren, and Schongau. Across my beloved homeland. My ruined and dishonored and beloved homeland.
My dear Heisenberg. My dear friend.
Silence. The silence we all in the end return to.
And of course, I know what they're thinking about.
All those lost children on the road.
Heisenberg wandering the world like a lost child himself.
Our own lost children.
And over goes the tiller once again.
So near, so slight a thing.
He stands in the doorway watching me. Then he turns his head away.
And once again, away he goes into the dark waters.
Before you can lay your hands on anything, your life's over.
Before we can glimpse who or what we are gone and laid to dust.
Settled in all the dust we'd raised.
Sooner or later, there will come a time when all our children are laid to dust, and all our children's children.
When no more decisions, great or small, will ever be made again. When there is no more uncertainty, because there is no more knowledge.
When all our eyes are closed, and even the ghosts have gone, what will be left of our beloved world, our ruined and dishonored and beloved world?
But in the meanwhile, in this most precious meanwhile, there it is. The trees in Fade Park, Gemertingen and Biberach, Mindelheim, our children and our children's children, preserved, just possibly, by that one short moment in Copenhagen, by some event that will never quite be located or defined, by that final core of uncertainty at the heart of things.